Have you ever noticed how often people want the title of being faithful, moral, or principled, but they don't actually want to pay the cost of living it out? Religious stories show this tension too. They talk about sacrifice, wisdom, and standing against cultural norms, but when the rubber meets the road, most folks, including many who call themselves Christian, would rather hold on to comfort than give something up for their values. Welcome to Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time, we'll explore what it really means to grow, how seeking wisdom keeps us from stagnating, how going against cultural norms often comes at a cost, and how living by our values may demand sacrifices we'd rather avoid. In this episode, we're asking an honest question. If claiming a label is easy but living it is hard, what does it really mean to choose growth over comfort? Because the truth is, transformation doesn't happen when we protect the status quo. It happens when we're willing to pay the price for something bigger than ourselves. So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. In this series, we're exploring readings from the Bible through the lens of sacred myth, looking for interpretations and lessons that don't demand a belief in the supernatural. What that means from a practical standpoint is that we will assume that these stories and writings are fiction, written by pre-scientific people with their own agendas and different audiences. Now, you might agree with the lessons I find, but I encourage you to look for something that rings true to you. Part of the beauty of understanding these writings as sacred myths is that we're free to interpret them for ourselves. We're free to learn the lessons that we need right now. So with that, let's dive in. As I said, tonight we'll be looking at the readings for the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C. Our first reading is from the Book of Wisdom. It's chapter 9, verses 13 through 18b. Our second reading is from the letter to Philemon. It's verses 9 and 10 and verses 12 through 17. And our gospel reading is from Luke. It's chapter 14, verses 25 through 33. Now we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. And with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from the Book of Wisdom. For who can learn the counsel of God? Or who can discern what the Lord wills? For the reasoning of mortals is worthless, and our designs are likely to fail. For a perishable body weighs down the soul, and this earthen tent burdens the thoughtful mind. We can hardly guess at what is on earth, and what is at hand we find with labor. But who has traced out what is in the heavens? Who has learned your counsel, unless you have given wisdom and sent your Holy Spirit from on high? And thus the paths of those on earth were set right. Our second reading is from the letter to Philemon. I would rather appeal to you on the basis of love, and I, Paul, do this as an old man and now also as a prisoner of Christ Jesus. I am appealing to you for my child, Onesimus, whose father I have become during my imprisonment. I am sending him, that is, my own heart, back to you. I wanted to keep him with me so that he might minister to me in your place during my imprisonment for the gospel, but I preferred to do nothing without your consent, in order that your good deed might be voluntary and not something forced. Perhaps this is the reason he was separated from you for a while, so that you might have him back for the long term, no longer as a slave, but more than a slave, a beloved brother. especially to me, but how much more to you, both in the flesh and in the Lord. So if you consider me your partner, welcome him as you would welcome me." And our gospel reading is from Luke. "Now large crowds were traveling with him, and he turned and said to them, 'Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost, to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going out to wage war against another king, will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." All right, so let's go back and take a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from the Book of Wisdom. And this reading reflects the philosophical climate of its time, most likely Alexandria, where many thinkers saw the body as something that weighed down the mind. The author points us toward God as the source of all wisdom, while admitting we can't really know what God has planned. And for us today, we don't need to lean on that supernatural explanation. The fact that we are conscious, self-aware beings, right, that we can reflect, imagine, and create, well, that makes our lives valuable in themselves. We don't need a deity to make us worthwhile. Now, the author's claim that all wisdom comes from God is easy to understand given the time period. They had no concept of how the brain functions, let alone how consciousness arises. And even now, we're still wrestling with those questions. But to say, we don't know, therefore God, is what's called the God of the gaps argument. Right? Throughout history, whenever humans couldn't explain something, whenever there was a gap in our knowledge, the answer was God. But each time science expands our understanding, well, that gap shrinks. And with it, the space for that kind of claim shrinks as well. Instead of using mystery as proof of divinity, we can see mystery as an invitation to keep exploring and learning. And here's where the advice in this passage actually holds up. The call to seek wisdom. The author ties it to a Holy Spirit, but we don't need to make that illogical leap. Seeking wisdom is worthwhile in and of itself. It pushes us to grow, to question, to reach for better understanding, even when the answers are incomplete. The alternative is to not seek wisdom, and that leaves us stuck, or at best, just sort of coasting along. As the motivational speaker and author Zig Ziglar once said, if you aim at nothing, you hit nothing. We can choose to aim higher by searching for wisdom in the here and now. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that it's important to seek wisdom. Yes, the framework of this passage is bound up in the thinking of its time. But the core truth still resonates today. Wisdom doesn't come from sitting still or blindly accepting easy answers. Wisdom comes from striving, questioning, and staying curious. We may never fully understand how our minds work or why consciousness exists, but the pursuit of wisdom keeps us moving forward. both as individuals and as a species. And that pursuit is worth it, because in the end, it's important to seek wisdom. All right, our second reading was from Paul's letter to Philemon. And this short reading is deceptively simple, but the backstory matters. Philemon owned a slave named Onesimus. Onesimus ran away, found Paul, and became a Christian. Paul sends him back with a letter asking Philemon not to punish him, but to accept him as a brother in Christ. On the surface, well, this looks noble, right? Paul advocating for mercy rather than retribution. But let's not miss the glaring issue. Paul doesn't condemn slavery. He doesn't say, Philemon, owning another human being is wrong. No, instead, he just accepts the institution of slavery as normal and just asks for a little kindness within it. And yes, despite what some Christians claim today, the Bible very clearly supports slavery. That's a hard truth, but pretending otherwise is just dishonest. We don't know the exact financial impact of freeing one slave, but it was probably significant. More than that, Paul was asking Philemon to risk his reputation. Freeing Onesimus could have made Philemon look weak in front of his peers. It might have encouraged other slaves to run away. And so in that cultural context, Paul's request was at least a bit radical, not because it abolished slavery, but because it disrupted the expected social order of the time. Philemon was being asked to give up rights he was legally entitled to in order to live out the values of this new faith community, this new faith that he was claiming to be a member of. Now, for us, the humanist lens pushes the message further. We can't ignore the moral failure, and it is a moral failure, of not condemning slavery outright. But we can still see the lesson in challenging cultural norms. Going against the grain often comes at a cost. Financial, social, relational, and that's something that plenty of us know firsthand. Anyone who has walked away from a family's religion or dared to live authentically outside of rigid traditions knows what it's like to be judged or mistrusted. Standing up against harmful norms isn't easy, but it's necessary for growth, for freedom, and for integrity. So the main lesson I got from our second reading is that it can be difficult to go against cultural norms. This passage doesn't give us the full justice we wish it did. Paul stopped short of condemning slavery, and history should remember that failure. But it still reminds us how costly it can be to go against what everyone else accepts as normal. Whether it's resisting unjust systems, questioning outdated traditions, or leaving behind a belief system that just no longer fits, it's never easy to swim against the current. But as an old friend of mine used to say, only dead fish go with the flow. Swimming against the current is where real transformation happens. But we still have to acknowledge that it can be difficult to go against cultural norms. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of Luke. And this passage from Luke, it doesn't pull any punches. Jesus uses rather shocking language, talking about hating family and giving up everything. But he's doing it to show just how costly discipleship is supposed to be. And while very few Christians today actually live this way, the examples are meant to drive home a point. Don't step into this commitment lightly. Know what you're signing up for, and don't kid yourself into thinking it won't demand something from you. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. Most Christians today don't want to give up much of anything. In fact, some, especially Christian nationalists, seem more focused on controlling everything around them. Oh, they hate plenty of people, but not in the sense of sacrifice that's implied in this passage. Instead of giving things up for a higher purpose, well, they cling tightly to power, privilege, and all their possessions. That stands in sharp contrast to the mythological challenge that's laid out here. Discipleship that actually costs something. For us, the humanist lesson is simpler and more practical. Living according to our values will always come with a cost. We don't need to take the give up all your possessions line literally. Almost no one does. Maybe a few vowed religious. But we do need to recognize that standing by our convictions can mean giving up comfort, convenience, or even some relationships. It means going into situations with eyes wide open, understanding the trade-offs, and choosing to stay the course because our values are bigger than us. That's what gives life its meaning. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that living according to our values may require personal sacrifices. This reading may sound harsh, but its deeper truth still holds. Anything worth living for, whether it's justice, compassion, or integrity, anything worth living for will eventually cost us something. It might mean letting go of comfort, security, acceptance. But those sacrifices aren't losses. They're investments in something greater than ourselves. When we know the cost and still choose to live by our values, we build lives of purpose and we build communities that are strong. We just need to remember that living according to our values may require personal sacrifices. All right, let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from the book of Wisdom, the main lesson I came away with was it's important to seek wisdom. In our second reading from the letter to Philemon, the main lesson I got was it can be difficult to go against cultural norms. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was living according to our values may require personal sacrifices. What these readings drive home is that we can't grow if we cling to the status quo. Settling for easy answers or blindly following the crowd keeps us stagnant. And that's just no way to live. Real growth requires seeking wisdom, asking hard questions, staying curious, refusing to let outdated or harmful cultural norms define us. But here's the catch. Choosing this path will almost always cost us something. Standing by our values may mean letting go of comfort, reputation, or even certain relationships. Yet those sacrifices are the price of real transformation. They are the proof that we're alive and that we're moving forward. And that's so much better than drifting with the current, because only dead fish go with the flow. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall and see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I'll try to answer two questions. So what and now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care about this because too many people wear the Christian label without living the cost. They call themselves disciples, but discipleship, according to their own scriptures, means sacrifice. Mercy, forgiveness, radical acceptance, those things are hard. They demand humility and courage. If you're not willing to give something up in order to live those values, then claiming the name Christian is just a hollow badge. This is important because so much of the Bible, messy as it is, so much of it still contains humanistic lessons that actually make sense in the real world. Things like kindness, hospitality, generosity, respect. And yet many Christians bypass those parts to double down on judgment and condemnation. That's not just hypocrisy, it's missing the very point their tradition is supposed to be built upon. We should care about this because it's not only about Christianity. Humanists, atheists, and what I call values-based Christians, they all face the same challenge. Living according to our values comes at a cost. It might mean sacrificing pride or comfort, or as I've said, certain relationships. But if we aren't willing to pay that price, our values, they stay abstract. They never become concrete. Our values never become real in how we treat each other. This is critical because contempt, whether it's faith-based or not, has just no place in a life built on real values. If holding on to your beliefs requires looking down on, excluding, or demonizing others, then it's time to rethink those beliefs. Letting go of that contempt may be the hardest sacrifice of all. But it's the one that opens the door to genuine connection and authentic community. And the last question I'll try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Where do we go from here? Well, sometimes the hardest part of all this is looking in the mirror. It's easy for people to wear a label like Christian without living the sacrifices and living the values that label is supposed to represent. That's cheap Christianity, claiming the name without paying the cost. But it's not just Christians who fall into that trap. Humanists, atheists, Muslims, Jews, we can all talk a good game about values while quietly dodging the times when living those values actually costs us something. So with that in mind, here's your question for the week. Where in your life are you tempted to settle for the cheap version of your values, claiming them without paying the cost to live them? Answering this question matters because it forces us to line up what we say with what we actually do. It's easy to point fingers at others. Heck, I do it all the time. But real growth comes from spotting our own inconsistencies and deciding what to do about them. When I was in my late 20s, I've talked about this before, I studied Catholic apologetics. I was told it meant defending the faith, right? Not apologizing for it. What I didn't realize at the time was that the whole framework, it wasn't built to stand up to real critical thinking. It was designed to keep believers comfortable when their core values clashed with all the harmful church teachings. One of the biggest clashes for me was around sex and gender. I knew so many wonderful people who didn't fit the church's rigid, unscientific mold of cisgender heterosexuality. The church's answer? Hate the sin, love the sinner. But when what they called a sin was literally part of who someone is, well, that line was nothing but a cruel contradiction. Apologetics then didn't give me answers. It gave me excuses. Proof texting Bible verses and parroting John Paul II's ultra-conservative Catechism of the Catholic Church, where he said that same-sex attraction was intrinsically disordered. That wasn't proof of anything. If anything, it pulled me further away. because it exposed how hollow those arguments really were. Years later, as director of youth ministry at my local parish, I had a choice. I could toe the church's line and pass on its narrow-minded teaching to teenagers, or I could live by my values. I chose the latter. I taught teens that sex and gender are complex, and that people shouldn't be accepted in spite of who they are, but celebrated because of their differences. Some teens disagreed. A few parents grumbled, and yes, a handful of families even walked away. But standing by my values was worth that price. Because cheap Christianity, claiming the name while ignoring its own supposed lessons of love, compassion, and mercy, well, that was something I just couldn't live with anymore. That's why this question is important. Where in your life are you tempted to settle for the cheap version of your values, right? Claiming them without paying the cost to live them? You see, when we take time to name the places where we've been coasting, where we've wanted the label without the sacrifice, well, it gives us a chance to recalibrate. Maybe it means having a hard conversation we've been avoiding, or giving up comfort to stand up for someone else, or dropping the contempt we've been holding on to. Whatever it looks like, this kind of reflection moves our values from abstract ideas into real-world habits. And when we live that way, our lives feel less hollow and more authentic. And our communities become stronger because of it. Well, before I wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. The British writer C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching." This quote is short and simple, but it gets right to the heart of our question. Labels are easy, right? Christian, humanist, atheist, whatever you call yourself. But integrity isn't about the label. It's about what you actually do when there's nothing to gain, there's no applause, no external reward. That's where the cheap version of values gets exposed, when we claim certain values but won't pay the cost to live those values. Our question this week asks you to look at those places in your life where you might be tempted to settle for appearances, where it's easier to say you stand for something than to sacrifice for it. C.S. Lewis reminds us that real integrity, real authenticity, happens in those quiet moments when no one is keeping score but you. And when you line up your actions with your values in those moments, that's when your life starts to feel solid and whole. That's when your values stop being cheap talk and start shaping the kind of person you're becoming. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week, but in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our question for the week and pay attention to the important lessons you come across wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that standing by our values may require sacrifices, but that's the price of real transformation, and that's the proof that we're alive and moving forward. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition. Copyright 2021 by the National Council of Churches of Christ in the United States of America. Used by permission, all rights reserved, worldwide. Thanks again for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series held most Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations is released as a podcast. You can find both the podcast and the occasional video versions of the presentations at thecodaproject.com. CODA stands for Creating Our Divine Alignment. When we learn to align our words and actions with our core values, that alignment feels absolutely exquisite. It feels divine. But it's a divine alignment that doesn't require belief in the supernatural. It's a divine alignment we have the ability to create for ourselves. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.